So not the best day in terms of ticket sales. In fact, sold 0 tickets. And that wasn't actually the worst thing about turning up at the theatre tonight, but I'll gloss over that. And so what I thought I would do is I'd walk you through the streets of Brighton. And these are the north lanes. And still talk to you about creativity and doing things. I start with my joke that gets me going, which is the Buddha says that we become the thing that we most resist, which in my case I think means I've been pushing really hard against a fat Yorkshireman. And that's what I am. I'm a fat Yorkshireman. That's my show. That's what you're coming to look at, is a fat Yorkshireman. And so you might ask, why me? Why should I have any kind of reason at all to be doing a show about creativity? Well, there's a few reasons. One is that I've just finished a book, which I think is going to be published. So I've done something. The other reason is that for the last 15 years, I've been a project manager, and that is kind of helping other people do things. That's what I've been doing. And finally is the reason that the thing that I'm going to talk about in this show, which I'm doing Mickey Rooney style, let's call it that, not the painfully racist impression of Japanese people, but hey, we can do the show right here. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going, hey, we could do the show right here. And so like while I've been writing my book, I've come to the realization of something really, really, it's so kind of like painfully simple that it's one of those things that's so simple that people don't notice it, which is there's a big difference between an idea and the implementation of that idea, the instantiation of that idea. Ideas and things aren't the same. That was the amazing earth-shattering realization that I came to. And because ideas and things aren't the same, there are lots of problems from turning ideas into things. So that's the realization that I've had. That's why me. Why you? Well, you might have done things in the past. I'm not talking about confessing to crimes here. I mean, you might have done new things, new creative things. And also you might have struggled trying to do new things and creative things in the past. And so if you have done that, then I think like what I have to say is worth you listening to. Nobody thought it was worth listening to tonight, but there you go. So that's what you do. And why now? Well, this is me remembering to add a joke at this point. They say there's no time like the present. And they also say there's no present like time. But it's a fucker to rap. And but there really is no time like the present. It's always a good time to figure out how to do things and how to get better at being creative. But also, you might argue that this is a particularly unique time in the history of human creativity and doing things, because, going into the real lanes now, I think lanes are spelt differently. One is L-A-I-N-E-S and the other one is L-A-N-E-S. I don't know why that is. Anyway, but, you might argue this is a particularly unique time, a particularly important time for thinking about creativity and doing things because of AI. Now, AI really, I saw a headline yesterday where somebody who was some kind of hedge fund investor or something said that all jobs are going to be replaced by AI apart from his. And I saw another headline yesterday, and these are serious headlines, these are not onion headlines, where apparently Mark Zuckerberg said that the problem we have at the moment, which is that lots and lots of people don't have any friends, that's going to be dealt with by Facebook giving you pretend AI friends. That's a real headline. I didn't dream that. That's a real headline. So I think we're at a very interesting point in the whole history of creativity. But also there's something else that's kind of really important to understand, which is AI doesn't really make anything. AI is entirely about the biscuit tin and not about the biscuit.
Here it is.
It's a bit like the whole difference between
Hiya.
it's a bit like the difference between a cynic, who is somebody, well, it's not the difference, it's the point about a cynic, which is they're somebody who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. That, like, value is about how things work in the world. That's the whole point of a biscuit. AI might understand descriptions of things, but it doesn't understand things themselves. And so that's a very valid difference. So I think, now with these kind of crazy headlines, it's a good time to be thinking about creativity. And then finally, why this? Well, I'm going to talk about this difference between biscuits and biscuit tins, because what I've noticed is that it's one of these things where, like, kind of so much pain is produced by people not really understanding the difference between an idea and the reality. And also, kind of what I started to understand is that when you start to kind of try and implement an idea, when you start to try and make an idea into a reality, what happens is you experience emotions, and the result of experiencing these emotions is very often that you either have a really unpleasant time, or even more often you just give up. So that's the whole kind of idea of the biscuit tin and the biscuit. And then finally, this is the final bit of the introduction, what's at stake? Why does it matter? Why should anybody listen to anything I have to say? Well, I think what's at stake is basically, if you don't understand what's going on with the biscuit tin and the biscuit, and you don't understand the emotions that are kind of created when you start to do something, you can't deal with them, then you won't be very good at doing things, and you won't be very good at creating things, or you'll have a really unpleasant time doing those things. And so I think that's quite an important thing that's at stake. So this is the idea of the biscuit tin and the biscuit, but I'm going to explain it further with another food analogy. I am, remember, a fat Yorkshireman, so maybe I understand the entire world through food. A long while ago I was reading a book. Yes, that's what Brighton sounds like. Brighton sounds like that all the time. A long time ago I was reading a book, and he was saying that it's very important, this exact same point he was making, it's very important to understand the difference between ideas and reality. And one way of understanding the difference between ideas and reality is to, as an exercise, it's like, think of two things that you could have done today. And one of those things is something that you actually did. And one of these things is something that you didn't do. But I want these things to be of similar level of interest, right? So one of them is, if one of them is like you went to the shop, the other one shouldn't be that you flew down to the shops using a jetpack, right? So they've got to be of similar levels of kind of interest. So I'm going to walk into the sun now. As the sun sets, I'm going to keep doing my performance. So, so think of two things. That one that actually happened, one that didn't happen, about the same level of ordinariness, and then crucially, look at the difference between them in your mind. What is the difference between those two things? And I was doing this exercise, and I was doing it after lunch, just after lunch. And so I thought, well, I had soup for my lunch, and I had chicken soup for my lunch, and I could have had a bacon sandwich. I really like bacon sandwiches, but I didn't have a bacon sandwich because I was trying to in a futile attempt to kind of keep my weight down. I was trying to limit the number of bacon sandwiches that I had, and so I was thinking, well, okay, so what's the difference between the chicken soup that I did have and the bacon sandwich that I didn't have? And then I realised, well, what's the difference between these two things is that I know that I had the chicken soup because I spilt some of it on my shirt. And this caused like a major realisation for me, which is that when you actually do things, things go wrong. One of the main ways that you know that you're doing things is that things go wrong. And this is why turning the biscuit tin into the biscuit, the description of a biscuit into an actual biscuit, is so problematic, because when we do things, when we try and turn the description of things into a thing, then we get lots of emotions. In fact, there's an entire TV series about this. It's called The Great British Bake Off. And essentially, what is the British Bake Off? It's somebody saying, well, I'm going to make this kind of biscuit, and then they try to make that kind of biscuit and they don't quite make that kind of biscuit, and emotional turmoil ensues. That's what that entire program is about. How could that really be a thing? It is. And the reason it's a thing is because people respond emotionally when things that they make don't exactly match what their original responses were. They respond emotionally when things go wrong, and we like actually will watch that on the telly. This is the amazing thing. Now this is the point where there's a real demand on my memory, because I'm just going to briefly talk about the 6 universal emotions. So there are obviously lots and lots of different emotions, but these are the 6 that are universal. So they are fear. Let's start strong with fear. Anger, that's another good one. Sadness, that's kind of like not a bad one either. Disgust, so those are kind of all 4 kind of supremely negative emotions: fear, anger, sadness and disgust. And then there's surprise, which can kind of go either way. You can have nasty surprises, you can have pleasant surprises. And then there's happiness. Finally, there's happiness. Quite often when I try and remember these 6 universal emotions, I forget happiness. Now the interesting thing is that all of these emotions, according to researchers, have expressions that go with them, which are universal. So even in tribes that we haven't contacted, those tribes have the same facial expressions for those 6 emotions. So these kind of emotions are universal to all humans. And also, these kinds of emotions are universal, in my experience, to trying to do things. In my experience of trying to do things in project management, all of those emotions happen. The one that's rarest, of course, is happiness. And so this is kind of like the first point. I'm 15 minutes through my talk, and this is the first point that I really want to hammer home, which is when we try and do things go wrong, and we respond to things going wrong emotionally. We have lots and lots of emotions. Now, the interesting thing is that responding to emotions is work. There's an author called Ali Russell Hochschild, I think that's how you pronounce her name. She wrote a book which is about something called emotional labour. And she talks about, basically like, if you're on a plane and you see that one of the other people who's flying is like cutting up rough and giving the air stewards and the air stewardesses a hard time. Now those people will be trying to be polite, will be trying to be friendly, they'll not be kind of shouting at him, they'll not be, I'm guessing it's a he, it might be a she. Whoever it is who's causing the problem, they won't be shouting at that person or belabouring them in that. They'll be trying to kind of control their emotions. And the point that Ali Russell Hochschild makes in her book is that that's work. She calls it emotional labour. Now when I talk about emotional labour, I don't mean what happened when my mother gave birth to me, which is what was that nurses warned her that I was ginger. I don't know what it is with nurses in Yorkshire and gingers. Because when I came back 13 years later to have an appendectomy, they said, we don't like gingers, they bleed. It's like, everybody bleeds? I don't think that's a supernatural distinction of gingers. Anyway, back to the emotional labour. So this is the point, is that when you do something creative, when you do something new, then you experience lots of these emotions, and you might think happiness, well, that's a great emotion, why is it a big deal dealing with happiness? But kind of we see lots of evidence from pop stars, from kind of other people who've made it big and been a success, that actually dealing with success isn't actually that easy either. So kind of maybe even dealing with positive emotions is work as well. My wife just recently, when I found out that I'd got a contract for my books, she said, can't you just be happy about it? And I said, well, no, I can't actually. I kind of wish I could in a way, but now I'm worried that I'm going to fuck it up. So no, I can't just be happy about it. So yes, when you start to do things, essentially you get handed all these problems, you get handed all these unexpected emotions. I was talking about this with one of my friends, and he was saying that, and I was saying, kind of like, when you do things, you get kind of like humiliated in various ways. And he was saying, well, you need to come up with an example for that. He's somebody who reads things that I write. And his example was that he was learning to play squash, and he played against somebody who he knew they were very good, they were at county level. And he thought he was doing pretty well against this guy. And then he found out that the reason he was doing pretty well against this guy was that the guy was playing left-handed when he normally played right-handed, just to give him a chance. And that was like completely put him off at that point. And I came up with a story as well, which is, and I realised this has completely put me off. Not completely, because now I've realised it's put me off. I'm going to push for it again, and I'm going to try and do something about it. But the story that I have is that I was doing, my wife is Greek, and I've been learning Greek for a while, and I decided I was going to do an exam in Greek and make it official. And at the level that I was doing the exam, most of the other people who are doing the exam at that kind of level, they're 12, 13, they're children of Greek people in London, because I was sitting the exam in London, and they're 12, 13 years old. And they go to Greek schools, so they go to Greek school at the weekend. And the Greek schools that they're in have little chairs and little tables for 12-year-olds. And so what I realised was, when I went into the exam room, that I was sitting in one of these little chairs with, like, not exactly my knees around my ears, but kind of like my knees more elevated than I would expect them to be, and also catching the bottom of these tables. And then I saw over in the corner, some of the invigilators were gathered together and they were chatting, and then gesturing towards a kind of a grouping of bigger chairs and bigger tables that were in the corner. And then because like some of the 12-year-old, 13-year-old boys, they put on a growth spurt, and they were a bit too small, a bit too big for these chairs and tables. And so they moved things around, and in the end, they had some bigger chairs and some bigger tables. And I didn't get a big boy chair, and I didn't get a big boy table. And the interesting thing is that I failed that exam. And the bit of this that really upsets me, and I think the bit that's kind of stopped me from trying to sit exams since, wasn't necessarily the failure of the exam, but it was more the incident with the big boy chairs and the big boy table. So this is what happens at this point, is we start to do things, we encounter emotions, we either don't know how to deal with those emotions, or it's just too much work to deal with those emotions, and so we stop, we give up, we abandon things. And one of the reasons that we might abandon things, I think, is because we're lied to by stories. So some people think that all stories essentially have the same arc, they have the same structure, And when I start to talk about it, you'll realise that this structure sounds extremely familiar to you. So you have somebody who's a relatively ordinary person. They're probably called something like Frodo Skywalker. And they're living somewhere which is called Tatooine. And then somebody turns up, Obi-Wan Gandalf or something like that, and says, you have to come on this quest. And they go, no, I don't want to come on this quest. And then, kind of like Gandalf the Kenobi says, you have to come on this quest. And they say, no, I don't want to come on this quest. And there's a bit of a tussle, and eventually they go on the quest. And the quest is full of adventures and it's full of difficulties. And at various points, they nearly give up, but they don't give up. And they have friends, and some of them are amusing and some of them are paddle bins that beep. And then there's a big battle and they win. And then they go home and they have a nice tea. That is the story of many, many, many stories. Now, of course, the difference between that and real life is that it has a structure. It's almost like it's on rails, that at the end, the hero who's been the chosen one is going to succeed. And of course, what happens in real life is that that's not what happens. If you think about the John Lennon quote about life is what happens while you're making other plans, we start off doing things and then we get distracted. Life gets in the way. We have families, we have babies, we have to have jobs. Oh God, we have to have jobs so that we can afford to eat and all that kind of stuff. Other things get in the way and we start quests and then we don't finish them. Incidentally, one of the kind of realizations I had when I was talking about this to myself like this, walking down the street, is that's the difference between kind of adventure stories and situation comedy. In situation comedy, people are always in the bad situation and they never escape it. That's how situation comedies work. But kind of stories, this idea that kind of like, if you strive and strive and strive, you'll be somehow the chosen one and you will gain success. That's not really how the world works, is it? That's not our experience of the world. Nowhere in any of these stories does the hero get to a certain level and then just can't improve anymore and gets bored and gives up. Nowhere in these stories does the hero start singing and somebody says, oh God, you're a terrible singer, never singing again, and then they just don't. That's not how those stories work. So stories are lying to you. And that maybe kind of puts, so that's not equipping us very well for getting through this kind of patch of difficulty. And what people tend to do is they tend to try and get through that patch of difficulty in two ways that are very helpful if they don't give up. And both of these ways are really kind of a different way of avoiding moving forward. And then there's a kind of third way that I'm going to talk about, which is better. So, I lived in North London for a while, and when you live in North London, you have to do an improvised theatre course. I think that's the law. And so I did do an improvised theatre course, and then I read about improvised theatre. And improvised theatre is having to make stuff up as you go along, and if you ever get an audience for your improvised theatre, it's making stuff up as you go along in front of people, which is quite a scary thing to do. And so one of the interesting things that happens, I read a book about it by a chap called Keith Johnston, is that people come up with ways to not do the thing that they're there to do, to not move the story forward and to not make things interesting. Does this sound familiar now? And one of the ways they do that is by doing something called agreed activity. So if you imagine a scene where you've got four people on a stage and they ask for a kind of place where they might be, where some kind of adventure might occur, and somebody says you're on the deck of a sailing ship, kind of old-fashioned tall ship. And so obviously the thing that happens when somebody says you're on the deck of a sailing ship is that somebody puts a fake telescope to their eye, looks at the horizon and says, oh my God, there's a pirate ship coming. Now, by saying that, this is what's called in improv terms an offer. By saying that, by talking about the pirate ship, essentially that person has pointed the story in a particular direction. And one of the things that they try and do in improvisation is to stop you rejecting that offer, saying, no, that's not a pirate ship, that's a seagull, or whatever. Like, so trying to avoid moving the story in the direction of this offer that somebody's made. To, like, that's what the story's about. And once, the minute that you've mentioned the pirate ship, the only thing the audience wants is to see a proper pirate. So there's an agreed cultural way that a pirate should be dressed. They have one eye and one leg and a parrot on their shoulder. It's like they've been through a particularly bruising encounter in a pet shop, followed by a visit to an antique shop and antique furniture store, should we say. And so, but what people might do in this situation is they might say something like, let's mop the floor, let's swab the decks, I think this is a nautical term. And then this is the really weird thing, that other people who are there on the stage this is popular music being played on the sitar, because this is Brighton. So the amazing thing is that some people will say, yes, let's swab the decks. Let's not deal with the fact that the pirate ship is coming towards us. And what this is doing is, like, this is basically a bunch of people agreeing not to deal with difficulties that are involved in creating things and doing things. Not to deal with the emotions, not to deal with the potential vulnerability of what can happen if they move the story forward. And of course the result is it's bad for the improvisers on the stage, although it feels safe, and it's bad for the audience because it's boring. And so this is something called agreed activity, and this is one of the kind of standard responses to experiencing those emotions, those difficulties, is to just find something to do that looks like it's the right kind of thing, but isn't actually the right kind of thing. It's not actually moving the story forward at all. It's just kind of doing something that's safe and repetitive, and you've got to be very careful when you're trying to create something, when you're trying to do something, because all kinds of people will really kind of accept doing some kind of agreed activity rather than pushing the project forward, rather than pushing the creative thing forward. I think I'm worrying about that now, my second year in Brighton. I'm thinking, how am I pushing this forward? How am I doing more marketing? I have no people today. Am I comfortable with having no people? What can I do to have more people so that I'm not comfortable anymore? Like, continually trying to make yourself more uncomfortable is a weird thing, isn't it? And you have large parts of your unconscious mind that are going to say, don't do that. So that's kind of one way of avoiding moving forward and going through the emotions. Another way of avoiding moving forward and going through the emotions is even sneakier, and that's perfectionism. I'm not going to go to the next stage. I'm not going to do anything different. I'm not going to deal with what will happen at the next stage until I've got everything that I do right at this stage. And of course this is just, actually now we know about agreed activity. This is just another form of agreed activity. It's more shouty and saying, look at me, look at me, look at me, but it's really just the same. It's really just another form of agreed activity.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, you're right, mate. How you doing?
Not so bad. This absolutely never happens in London, or indeed in Thessaloniki. Where was I? Yes. So how do you get through this wall of kind of not wanting to deal with the work of the emotions? Now, to explain what I think the way forward is here, I'm going to have to talk about a bunch of different things all at once. One of the things that I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to step up and down off of a chair, which is what I did in my performance last night. I'm not going to do it now, but I'll tell you how that works. Basically, what I do is I ask the audience what the physical definition of work is, and the physical definition of work is force times distance travelled. I'm a fat Yorkshireman. I apply a force on the earth, and I can travel a distance by stepping up and down off a chair. So I can do that. I can step up and down off a chair, and then I ask them what the physics definition of power is, and the physics definition of power is that I can. The amount of work you can do in a specific time, and so then I get somebody to time me for 30 seconds, and I try and step up and down as many times as I can from this chair in 30 seconds. And last night it was 12 times. Previously it's been 13 or 14. I think my power might be diminishing, but what that is that's my capacity for doing that particular activity. And my capacity for doing other kinds of activities has got a similar kind of score. It's got a value on it. So one of the things that I found when I was writing my book is that I could generate text, no problem. I can have ideas, no problem. The bit that I really struggled with was editing. I had nearly no capacity when it came to editing. And what I've managed to do, I think in many ways more by luck than management, is to find a way, more by luck than management is what my dad would say, is to find a way of doing editing. And 2 or 3 things have happened all together that have I've managed to increase my capacity for editing. One is that I've managed to find somebody who might be in the audience tomorrow when I'm saying this, so that's going to be slightly weird. I managed to find somebody who's prepared to read what I write, and so that's kind of shifted the kind of the way that I think about my audience for what I'm writing, I think, greatly. And also he's makes very useful suggestions, makes very helpful comments, and so that's kind of really helped. Another thing is that I found completely by accident is that kind of if I do exactly what I'm doing now, if I talk about what I'm doing, then that is really helpful in terms of arranging my ideas and moving them around. So the kind of ways in which I'd like to edit things on the page, I find that very difficult. But if I just talk like I'm doing now, then that they seem to kind of arrange themselves in my head more usefully. So that's another thing. And then there was the third thing, and I can't remember what the third thing was. Yes, I can. The third thing is showing up every morning and talk and writing. Some of that writing is creating text, some of that writing is editing, but just the basic technique of showing up every morning really makes a difference. So that's kind of the notion of capacity and how you might go around creating wiggle room to increase your capacity. You can't just magically increase your capacity. If there's something that you're stuck with, you can't just magically get better at that. It's taken me a long time to get anywhere in terms of getting better at that editing thing. And this brings me to something else, which is that I said I need these kind of 2 bits to stick them together to kind of light up the final bit of the show. So I read this book 2 or 3 times, and every time I read it, I thought, yeah, that's brilliant. That's what I used to do. This other thing. And then after I read the book, I changed my behaviour. So I'd just go back to what I was doing before completely. And so what is this book about? This book is called Presence, and it's by a woman called Patsy Rodenberg. And what I would do is, let me tell you what she talks about in this book. She talks about 3 different ways of communicating. And these 3 different ways have got numbers associated with them, but I'm not going to take them in the order of the numbers, a bit confusing. Hello. So there are 3 different ways of communicating, and one of those ways is what's called third circle. It's third circle communication. It's projection. It's shouting. It's forcing your ideas on the world. And sometimes we need to do that. But it's exhausting for us, and it's probably exhausting for the people who are listening as well. And the opposite of third circle communication is first circle, which is kind of being quiet, either not listening to other people or just talking to yourself, talking in a way that is not intended to have a different audience. And of course these things, first circle and third circle, they're kind of mirror images of each other. And again, we need these things sometimes. We need to talk to ourselves rather than talking to other people. We need to not listen to other people sometimes. But then there's a final kind of method of communication, which is second circle, which is essentially being in conversation with other people, with the world, with what you're trying to do. So not just kind of like saying, not shouting at the world and saying the world has to be like this, or not kind of paying no attention to the world and like how the world actually is, but actually being in conversation with the world. And I think that's what I started to manage to do when I started to learn how to edit things, is I started to manage to be in conversation with the text. That sounds rather fancy and academic, but also like with somebody who was actually reading what I was writing, and that allowed me to kind of move forward. But the crucial thing is, if you remember the stepping up and down off of the chairs, I can't do that for very long. I can only do that for probably about half an hour to an hour a day, an hour tops. And what I kept doing, the mistake I kept making when I was reading this book, was thinking, oh yes, I'll just be in this second circle conversation relationship with the world all the time now. That's what I'll do. And then I just kept falling back into kind of either not listening to people or shouting at people. That's definitely the mode of interaction on social media, isn't it? Is shouting at people. And so what I realised was that you need to have a kind of realistic plan for how you're actually going to engage with the aspects of whatever it is you're trying to create, whatever it is you're trying to do, that actually gives you a chance of kind of increasing your capacity for being in this second circle, this kind of discursive, interactive way of dealing with the world. But it doesn't expect you to be always like that. So like actually always being in that kind of mode of communication would be absolutely exhausting. It'd be like, a first day in prison or a first date all the time, or like a first date in prison. And, it'd be exhausting, right? So you can't do it all the time. You've got to find times when you keep coming back and trying to kind of push things on and move things forward. So, and the difficult thing is that this is not from the outside very often. This might not look very different from agreed activity or perfectionism, but what you are doing is something different. You're trying to have this kind of conversation with the world, jumping from kind of Patsy Rodenberg, who's worked with like the National Royal Shakespeare Company. It really reminds me of something from another kind of area completely, is a book called Zen and the Art of Archery, which is talking about learning to kind of be in a kind of situation where you're holding the bow with the arrow and the bow is kind of pulled back, and being comfortable in that kind of situation. And in Zen and the Art of Archery, it's called the state of highest tension. And there's a line in that book saying, remain comfortable in the state of highest tension. So this is kind of like pushing things forward, but pushing things forward in a kind of an aware sense rather than in an unaware sense. And I think kind of that's what I've started to manage to do with my writing, and it's also kind of what I've started to do with my performing. Tonight has been kind of slightly humiliating for various reasons, but that's where we are. So that's the kind of second circle, and remain comfortable in the state of highest tension. Finally, it's important to understand, and this is something again that I kind of realised and talked about a lot in my book, that the only way, in many situations, this is what makes it different from perfectionism. The only way that anything progresses is that sooner or later someone has to say, fuck it. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that you can't ever really understand all of the potential risks, all of the potential benefits. You can't understand how you're going to feel. We're terrible at thinking how we're going to feel about things. Psychologically, we're just not very good at it at all. And so the only way, very often, to move to the next step is to just shrug your shoulders, say fuck it, and do that next step. And so what I'm going to do now is an exercise. It's by a man who's arguably a complete charlatan and a rogue. Lots of people have questioned just about everything about him, but there's a chap called Richard Bandler, and but this particular exercise I find particularly useful, and I'm going to modify it slightly. But basically, what you do is you need to think about something that is the next step in something that you're doing or something that you're creating, and that you're hesitating to move to that next step. What is that next step that you're wanting to make in this thing? And sense, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how strong do you feel that feeling of hesitation? And imagine that it's on a dial, like a dial on a hi-fi. And let's say that level of hesitation is a 6, or whatever it is. Just start to turn it up, start to kind of turn it up a notch, and keep turning it up, keep turning up that feeling of hesitation until you get to the point where that feeling of hesitation is just a 10. You're kind of maximally feeling that hesitation. And then kind of when you're kind of maximally hesitating, then move on to frustration. Because like the fact that you're hesitating so much, it's just really, really frustrating, isn't it? It's hugely frustrating. So again, like, what's the kind of number that you have for your feeling of frustration? Is it a 6? Is it a 7? So just start to kind of turn up that feeling of hesitation. Start to gently turn up the knob on frustration, so that you're feeling more and more frustrated. More and more frustrated until you get to 10. You're feeling maximally frustrated. And then when like let that kind of frustration kind of pour over, and then you're into impatience. You're just impatient now, and you're thinking, I've just had it with this. I just need to get on and do this thing. And again, like, kind of figure out where you are in terms of impatience. You're number 5, you're number 6. Where are you in terms of impatience? And imagine that dial, and turn up that impatience. Turn that impatience. So now it's getting to 7, it's getting to 8, it's getting to 9, it's getting to 10, and then finally, when you've got to number 10 in terms of impatience, just think, fuck it. Fuck it. I am going to do this thing. I'm going to jump, and then I'm going to justify. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to notice what the emotions are as a result of doing this, and then I'm going to deal with those emotions. And that is a way forward with this. That is a way forward with the whole process of turning a biscuit tin into a biscuit. And this has been a strange performance, although I did have audience at various points. And hopefully tomorrow, I know at least one person is coming, but hopefully more people will come, and we'll get a genuine audience to go from the biscuit tin to fuck it.